This session is an example of cognitive behavioral therapy with John, who is actually also one of my favorite therapists, working with a client named Meredith.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
CBT, as it's popularly called in the literature, is similar to behavior therapy in that it focuses on learning theories, with the real specific focus in the session being what are the maladaptive or irrational cognitions, and what are the maladaptive or unhelpful behaviors that the client is engaging in.
Right. And when you work within the realm of cognitive or cognitive behavioral, it can be very gentle, very collaborative process, sort of like Aaron Beck.
And I like that approach,
Right.
but also it could be a little more abrasive and forceful, like Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavior therapy and his tendency to dispute or to use disputation to push people out of their irrational thinking.
So in this session that we're about to watch, John uses a very standard cognitive behavioral opening, and he makes a problem list.
And in this particular segment, we don't see Meredith list any more problems than the first one, because that's the one we chose to work on.
He also uses the classic 3-column cognitive behavioral technique, working with the problem of shyness that she's experiencing.
And so let's take a look.
Okay.
Well, Meredith, we know each other, and but the way we usually start a CBT session is to set an agenda.
Okay.
And so we might have several ideas about what we want on the agenda, but the first thing is usually for us to make a problem list
Okay.
together about whatever it is that you might want to work on.
Okay.
And then we'll do the problem list, and then we'll explore the thoughts and the behaviors that might be related to the problem. And hopefully by the end of our time together, we'll have a clearer idea about what's causing the problem and some ideas about how to maybe change things.
Sounds good.
All right.
So, one thing that I've been noticing lately is that I have a tendency to kind of hang back in groups. And I tend to observe instead of participate.
Okay.
And a lot of times I get really nervous when I feel like I'm expected to speak up. And I want to speak up, but I kind of feel like I freeze.
Okay. And so in particular then, in groups, the setting is big groups, little groups, does it matter?
It doesn't matter a whole lot, but generally I guess medium size, like, you know, in classes that I
Okay.
have. So
Yeah.
they're usually like maybe 12 people or so. So relatively small, medium. I don't know what size that is.
Okay. And so, but in your head, you probably would say, I would like to speak up, but for some reason you feel inside some anxiety or nervousness about that?
Definitely.
Okay.
And then sometimes when I try to force myself to speak up, when I actually don't feel ready, I get like, I feel like my throat's closing and I get a red face.
Okay. All right, so that's sort of one possible issue for us to talk about. Could you maybe give me a specific example of a particular group situation, as recent as you can, where you had this feeling of hanging back and maybe some fear of evaluation?
So in my statistics class, each week we have it's called an inclusion activity. And generally, I guess it's supposed to help people feel like the group's more cohesive and included.
Okay.
But I usually experience it as the opposite. So there's usually a task at the beginning of each class of like, take off your shoe and talk about the most interesting place your shoe has been. Stuff like this.
In stats?
Yeah.
Okay.
That usually I get really nervous and I feel like I can't think of anything to say, and I feel like I usually end up saying something really awkward or lame, and I just don't feel good about it. Like I feel...
Yeah. Can you give me that specific example of the recent time when maybe, and what you said too, including sort of the beginning, what happened, and then how it ended?
Yeah, so when we did this activity, it's like a really weird example.
Yeah. All right.
When we did this activity, you know, probably 6 or 7 people had gone in front of me, and I was like not listening to anything that anyone else was saying, just totally self-absorbed in terms of like, oh God, what am I gonna say? And not being able to think of anything. And then when it was my turn, I was wearing a pair of shoes that like are kind of like they have lace on them. And so I took it off and I said, I like these shoes because I get cool tan lines from them. So I didn't even really answer the question that was like, where have these shoes been? Or like the coolest place these shoes have been, or something like that. And then after I went, I didn't really listen to anything else anyone said because I was still like stuck on why didn't I answer the question, and just kind of feeling awkward.
Okay. So what I'm doing here is I've got several columns that I'm building, and the first one is you're in the stats class and you're going through an inclusion activity, and the second one is the thoughts that you're having. Okay, what thoughts are going through your mind, and the thoughts are, oh God, what am I going to say? Those are the early thoughts, and then maybe the later thoughts are, why didn't I even answer the question?
Yeah, and like, why can't I ever be articulate?
Okay. Why can't I ever be articulate? Okay. And then our third column are the emotions that you might be feeling. And so as you're in that situation and people are taking their turn, the teacher says you're doing the inclusion activity. People are taking their turns, and what are you feeling? How would you describe your emotional state?
Nervous. Yeah, like fearful.
Okay.
And like it's almost like I'm anticipating embarrassment. So I don't know if that's a feeling or not, but usually I feel embarrassed.
I put that in the thought column just because it seems like the anticipation of it is probably a thought, but embarrassment when you're in the middle of it is probably a feeling. Does that make sense? And then, so I got nervous, fearful, embarrassed as the emotions. And on a scale of 0, not at all, 100 being the most of that feeling you could ever have, how would you rate? Let's get rid of nervous because it's sort of covered by fearful. How would you rate fearful, and how would you rate embarrassed?
Maybe fearful, like a 4.
Okay.
Or a 5, I don't know.
4 out of 5 out of 100?
45.
Okay. I was going to say, oh, feeling pretty calm. So a 40 or a 50?
Yeah.
Okay. And embarrassed?
I'd say that's higher.
A little higher.
Yeah, like a 70.
So maybe a 70. And that would be at the moment that you're talking, or right afterwards, or right before? Fluctuate at all?
Yeah, I'd say like both during and after.
Okay. Okay, so during and after. All right, and so you know the cognitive approach to thinking about what's going on is that it's not the situation that causes the emotional reaction, but it's what you're thinking that causes the emotional reaction. And so it seems to me like one of the things that's going on, oh God, what am I going to say? And why didn't I answer? Why can I never be articulate?
Why can't I never be articulate? That
Yeah,
sounds exactly
it's perfect. We might have to start rating my anxiety now too. And then I guess there's the other thing you said, that you're anticipating embarrassment. And so are those words too also that are going through your head?
Yeah. Like, I wish I could be more clever, or I wish I could have just like a funny story right now.
Yeah.
Or make people laugh in a way that I want them to laugh.
In the preceding segment, obviously, Meredith is a very interesting young woman, and she talks a lot about some what might be considered irrational thoughts or maladaptive thoughts. In particular, we get to see a little glimpse of what she does that is black-white thinking, or dichotomous thinking.
Right. And she comes along with the process, even though obviously she's even kind of shy in the session, and nervous. Yeah. So in the next section, we can watch as you focus more on that black and white thinking that's getting her in trouble.
Right, and I also take a look at and try to point out helpful versus unhelpful thoughts. And I find that that's a good way to use, that's a good language to use with clients when you're using cognitive therapy, because they naturally kind of get a sense that, yeah, some thoughts are less helpful, some thoughts are more helpful. And in the upcoming segment, I actually do that in the here and now. If it happens in the room, I get a chance to point that out to Meredith.
Right. So let's take a look at that.
And one of the things I'm doing now is, a lot of times when you think about the thoughts that trigger the emotions, these are the thoughts that we would categorize as less helpful, okay? Kind of unhelpful thoughts. And then over here, what we're doing is we're coming up with some thoughts that might be more helpful, okay? Recognizing that no thoughts are perfect, but some thoughts are more helpful, some thoughts are less helpful. And you know, in your SAS class, you're going to do the inclusion activity
Every week.
every week. And so one possibility is you could come in prepared to shift your thinking from the less helpful to the more helpful. Just an idea.
It's a good idea.
Okay. So what else besides this is silly and what I say doesn't matter all that much?
I can be clever sometimes.
I can be clever sometimes. Good. That's sort of a counter to the why can't I ever be articulate?
Yeah.
Or why can't I never be articulate? Either way you say it. Let's pretend for a second that you were talking to a friend who had exactly this same scenario, and she was telling you the way that she talks to herself. Oh God, what am I going to say? And why can't I answer that? Why can't I ever be articulate? I know I'm going to embarrass myself. And so she's talking to herself that way. How would you talk to her?
I think that I'd probably express surprise, because I imagine that usually I don't perceive her as inarticulate or as embarrassing as she sees herself.
Okay, so you would be surprised and kind of reassuring to her and say, oh, you don't seem that way. And if you could be on her shoulder in the situation, what would you whisper in her ear? This is a good friend of yours. You want to be helpful.
I would tell her that she's funny and charming and usually has really cool stories to tell because she's had lots of good experiences.
So you'd be sitting on her shoulder saying things like, you are funny and charming and you have cool stories to tell. What's it feel like when you imagine actually even saying those words to yourself in this kind of situation?
I mean, it sounds pretty ideal, but it sounds really far away from my current experience.
It's not what you're whispering in your own ear.
No.
What would stop you from actually doing this, from talking to yourself just like you would talk to a good friend? Because you're talking to yourself, you're kind of talking to yourself more like somebody who wanted to pull you down. And so I just think, oh, what about that good friend? I mean, can you be a good friend to yourself in those moments and say something more supportive? You are pretty successful in a variety of different things in your life, right? And so if you take one of those examples and you kind of break it down, are you able to, what do you do to prepare? Well, for example, even for a statistics test, I would guess that you have to go through some preparation.
Study.
Study. Okay. Kind of like studying. Have you ever been in a play or a dramatic performance of any kind?
Oh no, I avoid that.
Totally. Not even like in grade school?
No. I think I maybe was in 7th grade.
Yeah?
Yeah, but I had a very small part.
Yeah.
I've always, like my whole life, shied away from being the center of attention. It never feels good to me.
No.
Which is ironic since I'm going to school to become a teacher.
Yeah, so you have taught before and spoken in front of groups. Small, medium.
Yeah.
What do you
But
do?
it never feels...
Well, it never feels comfortable, perfectly.
No. Yeah,
So even right now, as we're talking, okay. So I hear you say, it never feels comfortable, right? Would you put that thought in the category of helpful or unhelpful? To say that to yourself.
I'd say that's unhelpful.
Unhelpful. Okay. What's unhelpful about that thought?
It kind of makes me feel like no matter how much I prepare, I still won't feel like I'm good enough or competent or...
Yeah. And just before that you said, I always shied away from attention. It's never felt good. Okay.
Some pretty black and white thinking.
Well, that is pretty... Yeah, good job noticing that. And I hear you saying that black and white thinking is maybe too general in that it doesn't provide any real hope for it ever changing. And in that sense, it does seem like it fits in that unhelpful category.
I mean, I definitely think like, you know, if you're nervous about something to a certain extent, that's healthy because it makes you prepare more. But at the same time, that kind of thinking of being like, it will never get better, it'll never be okay, probably isn't that helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder if that's maybe, as we think about the preparation stage, that's one of the things that you said for a stats test you would study. I wonder if there's some way you could study this way that you have been thinking about yourself. I'm just not clever in a group. I'm just not comfortable. I've always shied away from that. I wonder if there would be different ways you could say things to yourself.
For instance?
For instance?
There are times when I am comfortable in groups.
There are times I am comfortable in groups. And that you probably would put into the more helpful thought category. So it seems like you've got this sort of circle of thinking in there that takes you down into a negative place, that the embarrassment kind of starts this negative spiral, takes you downward to, you're probably not consciously thinking, I'll be alone and unhappy, but somehow it's related. People will think you're stupid, they won't want to be around you.
Yeah, and I feel like I, like not really on purpose, but like I end up doing things to like make myself not seen, like kind of invisible. And then usually I don't feel like that's as rewarding when I feel engaged and involved in a group.
It kind of backfires and you probably feel more lonely and unhappy based on withdrawing and being more invisible.
Definitely.
And so you hold that belief of, if I do something embarrassing, it will go down that spiral, I'll be alone and unhappy, despite the fact that you told me just a couple minutes ago that you had a very embarrassing experience that now has added to your repertoire as a good storyteller. It's another story you can tell.
Yes.
So you can see that I'm questioning the evidence, and I wonder if you are questioning it too, or if you're just thinking, I better go along with this for now.
No, I definitely think that you're right. I just like hearing you say that I'm a good storyteller. That's so not my experience. I don't think I'm a good storyteller, so it's hard for me just to say sure. But I agree with the evidence part.
There is evidence that you have told some good stories.
Yes.
You're not sure you would conclude that therefore makes you a good storyteller.
Exactly.
So sometimes you are a good storyteller, and sometimes you're a less good storyteller. And so I kind of hear you, it sounds like you're very careful about coming to any positive conclusions about yourself, but you're much less cautious. You're much less cautious. You're more of a risk taker when it comes to jumping to negative conclusions about yourself. Would you say that's?
Yeah, I would say that's accurate.
And so as we kind of head down sort of toward the end of our meeting today, I'm thinking about, well, what might be some useful things for you to try, experiment with, to see if it's helpful for you in coping with this situationally based problem. Rita, I really like using that third person technique as a method for helping clients talk to themselves more gently. And then I really like the idea of her actually being on her own shoulder and whispering kind and supportive and positive things in her ear instead of the critical things that she often was whispering to herself.
Right. Well, you were very gentle and encouraging, and I think that helped her actually reveal even more extreme black and white thinking that she's subjecting herself to.
Yeah, in the end, this should help her automatically question her automatic thoughts a little bit more than she did in the past. And I have confidence. In fact, she said at the end of the session, she thought that this would be helpful to her in the future.
İzlediğiniz için teşekkür ederiz. Kanala katıl butonuyla bağışlarınızla destek olabilir. Ayrıca videoyu beğenip abone olabilirsiniz. Değerli görüşlerinizi yorumlarda bekliyor olacağız. Unutma, sen değerlisin. Kendine iyi bak.